Do you know what happens to truths that challenge our origins? They are not celebrated. They are being fought. Not because they are false, but precisely because they are true. And because this truth disturbs the established order, a collective certainty, a foundational story, which structures the identity of millions of people. History teaches us a pattern, a mechanism that repeats itself with disturbing regularity. A scientific discovery overturns an ancient belief. The discoverer presents his evidence. The institution reacts, not through rational arguments, but through personal attacks. We do not refute the facts. The messenger is destroyed. And then comes the silence. Years, sometimes decades, sometimes centuries of silence, until, discreetly, when it is too late, when the discoverer died, when his truth no longer threatens anyone, rehabilitation is coming. You've lived long enough to recognize this pattern, isn't that right? 1859, Charles Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species. 20 years of research, thousands of specimens collected from all corners of the world, meticulous observations, a theory that explains the diversity of life through natural selection. No creator God shaping each species individually, just blind mechanisms, random materials, and above all, this inevitable conclusion: man descended from the ape. Man is not the pinnacle of divine creation. It is the product from a long animal evolution. The reaction is immediate. We don't criticize his data. He is caricatured in the newspapers, drawn with a monkey's body. He is accused of destroying human dignity, to undermine the foundations of Christian morality. Bishops denounced him from the pulpit. Some academics refuse to debate with him. The Anglican Church condemns him. Darwin spent the rest of his life ill, consumed by anxiety, aware that his discovery had made him an outcast. He died in 1882. 30 years later, evolution is taught in all universities. Today, it is an indisputable scientific fact. But Darwin, on the other hand, has never seen its full rehabilitation. 1633. Galileo observes the sky with his telescope. He sees Jupiter's moons to go around the planet. He sees the phases of Venus. He understands that Copernicus was right. The Earth revolves around the sun, not the other way around. He publishes his observations. The Vatican reacts. Summons before the Inquisition. Accusation of heresy. Threat of torture. He is being asked to retract his statement, to publicly admit that he was wrong, that the earth is motionless at the center of the universe. As the Bible teaches, Galileo, at 70 years old, breathes, accepted. He recanted on his knees. He is sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. His books are banned. He died in 1642, a prisoner in his own home, blind, alone. The Catholic Church will not officially rehabilitate him. Then in 1992, 359 years later, Pope John Paul II finally acknowledges that Galileo was right. But Galileo, he has been dead for a long time. If you are still here, that's because you're one of those who prefer the uncomfortable truth to reassuring lies. Subscribe to join those who dare to face history. 1847, Vienna, General Hospital. Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis, young Hungarian doctor, works in the maternity ward. He observes something disturbing. In the pavilion where the medical students' women give birth, the mortality rate from puerperal fever reached 18%. 1 in 5 women dies. In the neighboring pavilion where midwives practice, the rate is 2%. Why this difference? Semmelweis Church. He notes that the students come directly from the autopsy room. They handle corpses in the morning. Then women give birth in the afternoon without washing their hands. He puts forward a hypothesis. What if the students carried something invisible, something deadly, corpses, to living women? He orders a simple protocol. Wash your hands in a chlorinated solution before each delivery. The results are immediate. The mortality rate drops to 1%. Thousands of lives saved. But instead of being celebrated, Semmelweis is under attack. Viennese doctors feel insulted. You accuse us to kill our patients with our dirty hands? This is unacceptable. His superior fired him. His colleagues ridicule him in medical journals. He is trying to publish his results. On refuse, sees articles. He writes open letters to doctors in Europe. He begs them to adopt its protocol. On l'ignore. He sinks into depression. In 1865, he is forcibly interned in a psychiatric hospital. 2 weeks later, he dies, beaten to death by the guards. He was 47 years old. 20 years after his death, Louis Pasteur develops the germ theory. Everyone suddenly understands Semmelweis was right. Today, every surgeon in the world washes his hands before operating. Korn Semmelweis died in an asylum. Despised. Forget. Do you see the mechanism? It is always the same. A discovery which disrupts the order of things. A man or a woman who dares to reveal it. L'institution who feels threatened. Her arguments were not threatened, but threatened in its power, in its legitimacy, in its ability to control the narrative. Then she attacks. She does not refute the evidence. It destroys the person. And often, that's enough. Silence falls again. The years go by. And then one day, when no one feels threatened anymore, when the discoverer is dead and buried, the discreet rehabilitation begins. A statue is erected in his honor. A street is named after him. Its discovery is taught in textbooks, as if she had always been accepted, as if nobody had never fought her. But you know better. You have lived long enough, having observed this pattern in your own time, perhaps in your profession, perhaps in your family, perhaps in major societal debates. This way, that institutions to react when someone touches to something sacred. So now, let me tell you, that's another story. A story which began in 1945 and which continues today. A story of archaeological discoveries, from ancient manuscripts, of rediscovered graves. A story names engraved in stone for 2,000 years, names that attempts were made to eliminate, names which perhaps reveal the most disturbing truth of Western history. 1945, Upper Egypt. Peasants discover a jar containing Christian manuscripts from the 4th century, texts that the church had condemned, burned, prohibited, texts who tell another version from the story of Jesus. 1980, Jerusalem. Construction workers accidentally open a tomb from the 1st century. Inside, 10 ossuaries, names engraved in Aramaic and in Greek. Yeshua bar Yosef, Jesus, son of Joseph, Maria, all of them, and another name, a name who shouldn't be there, Yehuda bar Yeshua, Judah, son of Jesus. 2002, an Israeli collector reveals to the world the existence of an ossuary which he has owned for decades. An inscription in Aramaic. James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. 3 discoveries, separated by decades, but who tell the story together, a coherent story. A story religious institutions do not want that you heard. For 150 years, discoveries are piling up. Archaeological evidence, authentic manuscripts, scientific analyses, and for 150 years, we bury them. They are being downplayed. We attack those who dare to speak about it. They are accused to be charlatans. sensationalists, enemies of the faith. But the stones, they don't lie. The tombs do not disappear simply because they are disturbing. The inscriptions remain engraved, even when we refuse to read them. So now, the question becomes, what exactly did they find? Which justifies such silence? Before going any further, we need to understand what we've been told. The official story, the one that is taught in churches, the one depicted in Renaissance paintings, the one that structures faith of 2 billion Christians in the world. This is the story as we know it. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in Judea, during the reign of King Herod. His mother is Marie, a young virgin from Nazareth. His earthly father is Joseph, a carpenter, a just man. But according to the doctrine, Joseph is not the biological father of Jesus. Jesus was miraculously conceived through the Holy Spirit, a virgin birth. Mary remained a virgin before, during, and after childbirth. That's the dogma of the perpetual virginity of Mary, affirmed by the Catholic Church and Orthodox. Jesus grew up in Nazareth. At 30 years old, he begins his public ministry. He preaches. He recovered. He gathers disciples. He enters into conflict with the Jewish religious authorities. In the year 30 or 33 AD, he is arrested, judged, sentenced to death by Pontius Pilate, the Roman prefect of Judea. He is crucified on Golgotha in Jerusalem. He dies. We lay down our body in a tomb, carved into the rock, closed off by a large stone. 3 days later, women come to the tomb. They find it empty. Jesus has risen. He appears to his disciples for 40 days. Then he ascends to heaven, body and soul. It's the ascension. That's the story. Simple, consistent, miraculous. She inspired 2,000 years of faith, the art of civilization. Millions of lives have been transformed through this belief. Cathedrals were built. Wars have been fought. Empires converted. But here's the problem. When we examine historical sources, the oldest documents, written texts closest to the events, this story doesn't hold up. It's cracking. She reveals contradictions, inconsistencies, late additions. Let's begin by the Gospels themselves. There are 4 Gospels in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, Jean. They are called the canonical Gospels because they were chosen by the Church in the 4th century as being the only authentic texts about the life of Jesus. But these 4 texts, they don't tell the same story. They do not contradict each other about minor details. They contradict each other on fundamental elements. Take the birth of Jesus, the virgin birth. This is the pillar of Christian Christology. If Jesus wasn't born miraculously, if he has a human biological father, so it is not the Son of God incarnate, all of theology collapses. Or, based on the 4 Gospels, only 2 they mention a miraculous birth: Matthew and Luke. The 2 Gospels, the latest ones. Matthew was written around 80-85 after Jesus Christ. Luke around 85-90. That's to say 50 to 60 years old after the death of Jesus. 2 entire generations. Mark, the oldest Gospel, written around the year 70, does not mention no virgin births. He begins his story with the adult Jesus getting baptized by Jean-Baptiste. No Annunciation, no Angel Gabriel, no Mary miraculously pregnant, nothing. Jesus simply appears, adult, at 30 years old, and begins his ministry. Why Mark, who wrote it first, who was closest to the events, doesn't he mention a miracle of such fundamental importance? Jean, the later Gospel, written around 95 or 100, doesn't speak either of miraculous birth. He begins with an abstract theological prologue on the Verb which becomes flesh, but no birth story. No mention of pregnant Marie through the Holy Spirit. Jean definitely knew what Matthew and Luke were saying. Their texts were already circulating. For what doesn't he pick up this story again? What if it were true? Even more disturbing, Matthew and Luke, the only two which tell the story of birth, contradict each other between them. Matthew said that Joseph and Mary lived in Bethlehem. Jesus was born there. Magi come from the east, guided by a star. Herod, worried, orders the massacre children of Bethlehem. Joseph fled to Egypt with Marie and the child. They stay there until Herod's death. Then they come back. But out of fear of Herod's son, they settled in Nazareth. Luke tells completely different. Joseph and Mary live in Nazareth. They must go to Bethlehem for a census ordered by Emperor Augustus. Marie gives birth there, in a stable. Shepherds come to worship the child, warned by angels. Then, 40 days later, Joseph and Mary take Jesus at the temple in Jerusalem to present it to God according to Jewish law. After that, they return directly in Nazareth. No flight to Egypt, no massacre of innocents, no magicians. These two stories are incompatible. They cannot be true. Both. One of the two, or both, was invented, added for theological reasons, to match the life of Jesus to the prophecies from the Old Testament. Matthew wants Jesus fulfill the prophecy of Hosea. I called my son out of Egypt. So he invents the flight into Egypt. Luke wants Jesus born in Bethlehem, the city of David, to fulfill the prophecy of Micah. So he invented the census, which obliges Joseph to go there. Besides, historically, this census of Quirinius, which Luke is talking about, took place in year 6 after Jesus Christ, not before Herod's death in 4 BC. The two events are separated 10 years. Luke mixed two different periods to construct his story. You begin to see the problem? Now, let's move beyond the Gospels. Let's look external sources, Roman historians, Jewish chroniclers, those who lived in the time of Jesus and who could have testified of his existence, of his miracles, of his resurrection. Silence total. No contemporary Roman historian Jesus is not mentioned during his lifetime. Not Seneca, not Pliny the Elder, not just from Tiberius, Jewish historian who wrote a column of Galilee covering precisely the period of Jesus' ministry. He doesn't mention it. Not once. The first mention of Jesus outside of Christian texts appears in Flavius Josephus, Jewish historian, in his book Jewish Antiquities, written around the year 93, 60 years after the crucifixion. Josephus writes a famous passage, the Flavian Testimony. He describes Jesus there like a wise man, a miracle worker, crucified under Pilate, and whose disciples affirm that he has risen from the dead. But here's the thing. This passage is almost certainly a Christian interpolation, an addition made by a Christian scribe in the 3rd or 4th century. For what? Because the style is different from the rest of Josephus's text. Because the early church fathers, who quote Josephus extensively, never mentioned this passage before the 4th century. And above all, because Joseph was Jewish, he would never have written that Jesus was the Messiah and that he had risen from the dead. That would have made him a Christian. What about other Roman references? Tacit, in 116, briefly mentions that Nero persecuted Christians. A group called, according to Christus, who was executed sous Ponce Pilate. That's all. One line. 85 years after the events. Tacitus does not describe Jesus. He simply repeats what Christians of his time believed. Suetonius, in 120, mentions disorders in the Jewish community of Rome caused by a certain Chrestus, perhaps Jesus, maybe someone else. Impossible to say. Pliny the Younger, in 112, write a letter to Emperor Trajan to ask him how to treat Christians. He mentions that they sing hymns to Christ like a god. But he said nothing about Jesus himself. Do you see the pattern? No contemporary sources, no non-Christian eyewitnesses. All mentions they come decades after the events, and they only report what Christians themselves they already believed. So the question becomes, if Jesus really existed, if his life was really also extraordinary that the Gospels claim, why no one else? That our disciples? He didn't talk about it at the time? And above all, this question, even more disturbing, if Jesus had really a biological father, someone must have known. His family, his neighbors, the people of Nazareth. And if someone knew, this name had to be erased so that the myth may survive, so that the virgin birth become credible, so that Jesus can be transformed of a Jewish rabbi as the incarnate Son of God. Understand this clearly. These contradictions, these are not secrets. They are taught in theology faculties. All serious exegetes, they know them. But between academic knowledge and popular belief, there is a chasm religious institutions deliberately maintain. Because questioning the official story, it's about questioning 2,000 years of doctrine. That's a threat legitimacy of the church itself. But here's the thing. There's something that theologians cannot control it. Something who escapes to the councils, to dogmas, to the prohibitions. Archaeology. And it is precisely this abyss that certain archaeological discoveries attempted to fill the gap. Discoveries who bear names engraved in stone. Names who crossed 2,000 years. Names that we tried to make disappear. But the stone, she, don't lie. Mars, 1980. Talpiot, southern suburb of Jerusalem. A residential neighborhood rapidly expanding. New buildings are springing up everywhere. The modern city devours the ancient hill. A team of construction workers is working on a new construction project. They need to level the ground, dig the foundations. To go faster, they use explosives. A charge is placed, detonation, the rock fractures, and suddenly, a hole appears, a cavity on the hillside. The workers approach. They light up the interior with their lamps. What they see makes them retreat. A funeral home, dug in the limestone rock, and inside, lined up against the walls, stone chests, ossuaries. They have just reopened a Jewish grave from the 1st century. A tomb sealed for almost 2,000 years. The foreman does what he must do. He calls the Israel Antiquities Authority. In Israel, any archaeological discovery must be reported immediately. Construction has stopped. The archaeologists arrive. Amos Kloner is sent to the website. He is the chief archaeologist of the Antiquities Authority for the Jerusalem district. A methodical man, rigorous, trained at the Hebrew University. With him, son assistant Yosef Gat. They examine the tomb. It's a typical tomb from the Second Temple period, between 20 BC and 70 AD, before the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. The tomb is of the kokum type, a central chamber with niches carved into the walls. That's it. That the bodies were deposited initially. Then, after a year, when the flesh had decomposed, the bones were recovered, and we placed them in ossuaries, these limestone chests. This was Jewish practice of the time. a practice which lasted about a century. From 30 BC at 70 after, just the time of Jesus. Clone Agat ossuaries are included. There are 10 of them. Some are decorated of carved rosettes, others are smooth. They are all made of limestone from Jerusalem. And above all, 6 of them bear inscriptions, names engraved in Aramaic and in Greek. The archaeological protocol is strict. We photograph everything. Each ossuary is measured. Each inscription is recorded accurately. We catalog everything according to a system of official numbering. This tomb receives the number IAA 8500. The ossuaries are numbered of IAA 8500 at IAA 8509. Clones examine the registrations. He reads Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek. That's his job. And what he reads, it makes him frown. First ossuary, inscription in Aramaic, Yeshua bar. Yosef transcription, Yeshua bar Yosef. Translation, Jesus, son of Joseph. Second ossuary, inscription in Hebrew, Maria Maria. This is the Latinized form of Miriam. Marie. Third ossuary, inscription in Hebrew, Yossi, all of them. An affectionate diminutive of Joseph. A family name, respondent. Fourth ossuary, inscription in Aramaic, Judah, bar Yeshua, Yehuda, bar Yeshua, Judah, son of Jesus. Fifth ossuary, inscription in Hebrew, Matthew dead, Matthew. Sixth ossuary, inscription in Greek, Mariamne, or Mara, Mariamene, and Mara. Marie said, the mistress, or Marie the teacher. Cloner takes notes on everything. He takes pictures. He makes sketches. The ossuaries are being transported to Rockefeller Museum from Jerusalem. The official filing of the Antiquities Authority. To be, they are in storage, cataloged, archives. And then Cloner writes his report, an archaeological report standard. Tomb from the 1st century, 10 ossuaries, 6 with inscriptions, common nouns of the time, no particular features to note. His conclusion is clear. These names were very widespread in Judea from the 1st century, Yeshua, Yosef, Maria. They were first names the most frequent. Hundreds can be found of Jesus, son of Joseph, in the records of the time. It's a coincidence, nothing more. The report is published in an academic journal in 1996, seasons after the discovery. A discreet publication? Technique that nobody reads, outside from a handful of specialists. The ossuaries remain stored in the museum's reserves. The Talpiot site is covered. We're building a building on top of it. Life goes on. Silence. For 16 years. But here's the thing. There's something that Cloner did not mention in his initial report. Something that he saw, which he noted, but that he chose to minimize. Something of statistics, of mathematics. These are not only common nouns taken in isolation. That's the configuration, the combination. All these names ensemble, in the same family tomb. Yeshua bar Yosef, Jesus, son of Joseph. All right, common noun, more, Yeshua bar Yosef, plus Maria plus all of them. To be, it's no longer also common, because the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verse 3, mentions exactly this configuration. When the people of Nazareth see Jesus preaching, they say, "Isn't that the carpenter? Mary's son, Jacques' brother, from Joses of Jude. And what about Simon? Joses. This is the Greek form, Diosa, the same name, an affectionate diminutive of Joseph. And here it is, engraved on an ossuary, in a tomb which also contains Yeshua, bar Yosef, and Maria. Already, statistical probability begins to fall. It's no longer a simple coincidence. It's a family setup which corresponds exactly to the family of Jesus described in the Gospels. But that's not all. There is this other ossuary, the one bearing the inscription, Yehuda bar Yeshua, Judah, son of Jesus. The Gospels never mention a son of Jesus. Never. Throughout the Orthodox tradition, Jesus is single. He didn't neither woman nor children. It is a central dogma. But other ancient texts that the church condemned and destroyed, mention that Jesus was married, that he had a partner. What if Jesus was married? Then it is perfectly plausible that he had children, a son named Judah. And then there's this sixth ossuary, Mariamene and Mara. Marie said the mistress, in Greek. Why Greek? Because it was probably an educated woman who spoke Greek, who might have come of a Hellenized community. The title immediately in Aramaic means mistress or lady. It's a title of respect, by authority. Or, there is an ancient text discovered in Egypt in 1945, which mentions a woman called Mariamene, a Christian Gnostic text, the Gospel of Philip. And in this text, Mariamene is described like the companion of Jesus, that he loved more than all the other disciples. You begin to have the image who is being formed? A family tomb from the 1st century, in Jerusalem, with 6 names engraved: Yeshua bar Yosef, Maria, all of them, Yehuda bar Yeshua, Mariamene, dead. A configuration which corresponds exactly to the family of Jesus according to the Gospels, with in addition a son, Judah. May the Gospels do not mention, but what about other ancient texts? Suggest, and a woman, Mariamene, who bears the same name that the companion of Jesus in Gnostic texts. Understand this clearly. These ossuaries existent. They are not an invention. They are not fakes. You can check the references, IAA 8500 at IAA 8509, Antiquities Authority of Israel. These are not controversial artifacts discovered by amateurs on a black market. These are official documents, discoveries by the State of Israel himself, cataloged, photographed, preserved in a public museum. So why this silence 16 years old? Why Cloner did he wait 1996 to publish his report? And why, even in this report, did he downplay it? The meaning of this discovery? Why did he conclude that it was a simple coincidence without even calculating statistical probability of this configuration? Why did we have to wait 1996 so that someone dare to ask the obvious question? Because in the meantime, another discovery had appeared, a discovery who changed all. October 2002, 22 years after Talpiot's discovery, the archaeological world is shaken through an advertisement. Law, Biblical Archaeology Review, one of the magazines the most respected in biblical archaeology, publishes an article explosive. An Israeli private collector has an ossuary from the 1st century, limestone from Jerusalem. And on this ossuary, there is an inscription in Aramaic, 6 words: Jacob bar Yosef, brother of Yeshua. Yaakov bar Yosef Akui, the Yeshua. Translation: Jacques, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. The announcement is making headlines newspapers: CNN, BBC, the New York Times. For the first time in history, we may have direct archaeological evidence of the existence of Jesus, not a written text decades later, not a mention in a column, but an inscription contemporary, engraved by someone who knew personally Jacques, who knew that his brother, his name was Jesus. But before we talk from controversy, which is going to explode, you need to understand why this inscription is so extraordinary. Of the thousands of ossuaries of the 1st century discovered in Israel, almost all they follow the same format. The name of the deceased is engraved, then his father's name, X, son of Y. This is patrilineal descent. That's how it is that people were identified at the time. Simon, son of John. Mary, daughter of Jacob. It's simple. That's standard. That's the norm. Or, this ossuary is different. He didn't just say, James, son of Joseph. He adds, brother of Jesus. This is extremely rare. Actually, it's almost unique. In thousands of ossuaries, he's the only one, or one of the very rare, who mentions a brother in addition to the father. For what? Why engrave? What is the brother's name? That doesn't make sense that if the brother is more socially important than the father, if the brother is famous, recognized, revered, if you mention his name gives it more legitimacy, more prestige than to mention the father's name. Imagine that we find tomorrow a tombstone in Corsica with the inscription, Pierre, son of Charles, Napoleon's brother. You would understand immediately. The brother is the emperor. It's him who matters. It was through him that we identify Pierre. Here, that's exactly the same logic. Jacques is identified not only as the son of Joseph, but above all, as the brother of Jesus. Because Jesus, at the time where this ossuary was engraved, was already an important figure. A figure sufficiently recognized to mention his name served identification. And that corresponds perfectly to historical sources that we have about Jacques. Jacques, in Hebrew, Yaakov, is mentioned in the Gospels like one of Jesus' brothers. Mark 6:3. He cites him by name. Paul, in his epistle to the Galatians, written around the year 50, talks about Jacques, the brother of the Lord. He said he met him in Jerusalem 3 years after his conversion. The Acts of the Apostles, they tell us that after the death of Jesus, Jacques becomes the leader of the Christian community from Jerusalem. Not Pierre, not Jean, Jacques, Jesus' brother. It's him who presides the Council of Jerusalem around the year 50. It's him who takes theological decisions majors. He is a figure of absolute authority in early Christianity. And then, there is Flavius Josephus, the Jewish historian. In his Jewish Antiquities, written around the year 93, he recounts an event occurred in the year 62 in Jerusalem. The high priest, Anan, takes advantage of a Roman interregnum. He convenes the Sanhedrin. He is being judged and condemned to death several people accused to violate the law. Josephus wrote, he summoned an assembly of judges and translated before her, Jacques, brother of Jesus, said Christ, along with a few others. He accused them for having broken the law and delivered them to be stoned. Jacques, brother of Jesus, said Christ, executed in 62. Eusebius of Caesarea, Christian historian from the 4th century, gives even more details. He said that Jacques was thrown from the top of the temple from Jerusalem, then finished with stones. He was called Jacques the Just because of his piety extraordinaire. He prayed constantly at the temple. He was respected even by the Jews non-Christians. So, when we discover an ossuary bearing the inscription, Jacques, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus, all alarms ring. That's exactly it, the right profile. An important man, a man whose brother, Jesus, was well known to serve identification, a dead man in Jerusalem in the 1st century. But here's the thing. This ossuary has not been discovered during an excavation official archaeological site. It belongs to a private collector, a man named Oded Golan, Israeli engineer, passionate about antiques. He claims to have bought this ossuary in the 1970s in the antiques market from Jerusalem. At the time, it was legal. Today, every antiquity discovered in Israel belongs to the state. But before the 1978 law, collectors, they could buy freely. Golan owns a collection thousands of pieces. Jacques' ossuary it is part of for decades, but he doesn't realize not its importance before 2002. When an expert note the object and reads the entire inscription, the announcement has been made. The whole world talk about it. And then, the Antiquities Authority of Israel reacts. In 2003, the IAA accuses Oded Golan of falsification. She states that the inscription is partially false. The first part, James, son of Joseph, is authentic. But the second part, brother of Jesus, it was added recently. Engraved by a modern forger to increase the value of the coin. Golan is arrested. A trial begins. It will last 8 years. The longest archaeological trial of the history of Israel. The accusation parades experts, geologists who analyze the patina. This mineral deposit which forms on the stone over the centuries. They claim that the patina on the second part of the registration is different. Suspects. The defense scroll its own experts, Lee Geological Survey of Israel, analyze the patina and concludes that it is consistent with 2,000 years of seniority. Professor André Lemaire, epigrapher at the Sorbonne, one of the greatest specialists of the world's ancient inscriptions, examines the ossuary. He concluded that the writing style is typical from the 1st century. Paleography, the shape of the letters, is correct. No sign they falsify modern. The trial becomes a battlefield experts, each camp to its scientists. Each camp A sees analyses. The archaeological community divides. Some believe to authenticity. Others, they cry foul. In 2012, after 8 years, the verdict is in. The judge acquit Oded Golan, not guilty. There is no sufficient evidence of falsification. But be careful. The judge did not say that the ossuary is authentic. He simply said that we have not proven that it was a fake. Legal nuance important. Doubt remains. Even today, the archaeological community is divided. The IAA refuses to recognize the ossuary as authentic, but she cannot prove that it is false. The ossuary exists. He's here, in the Golan collection, and millions of people in the world have seen the photos, read the inscription. But here's the thing, where it becomes fascinating. If this ossuary is authentic, if it really contains the bones by Jacques, brother of Jesus, died in 62 in Jerusalem, so where should he have to be buried? In the family tomb? Obviously. Where it rests his brother Jesus, where it rests his mother Maria, where they rest the other members of his family. And when we come back at Talpiot's tomb, discovered in 1980, on Constate, something strange. There is Yeshua bar Yosef, Jesus, son of Joseph. There is Maria. There is all of them. Another brother mentioned in the Gospels. But there is no ossuary for Jacques, no registration with his name. Yet, the archaeological report of 1980 mentions 10 ossuaries, 10, but only 6 with inscriptions legible. And among these 6, no Jacques. So, where is Jacques? The hypothesis begins to form. Jacques died in 62. Public death, violent execution, stoning. He is already a major figure of early Christianity. His family recovers his body. She wants to honor him. She has it engraved in ossuary with a special inscription. Not only that, Jacques, son of Joseph. More. Jacques, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. To mark its link with the founder of the movement. And she buries him in the family tomb in Talpiot. With his brother Jesus. With his mother Maria. With his brother Yosef. But then, at some point, this ossuary is withdrawn from the grave, perhaps in the 1st century by disciples who wanted to preserve the relics of James, perhaps in the 2nd Or in the 3rd century, when Christianity spreads and that the relics become valuable? Perhaps much later. Impossible to say. What is certain is, that's the ossuary enters circulation. He passes from hand to hand. It ends on the market antiques. And in the 1970s, Oded Golan buys it. Without knowing what he owns? Really. In 2005, scientists decide to test this hypothesis. They collect patina samples on Jacques' ossuary. They compare them with samples on the Talpiot ossuaries. The results? Compatible. Not identical. Because the patina varies even within the same region, but compatible. The chemical signature is similar, as if the ossuaries came from the same geological zone, from the same limestone hill from Jerusalem. This is not definitive proof, but it's a clue, an additional clue which is added to others. And now, the question becomes impossible to ignore. What is the statistical probability? All those names, all these correspondences, be a simple coincidence? When Amos Kloner published his report in 1996, 16 years after the discovery of Talpiot, his conclusion is categorical. Yeshua, Yosef, Maria were extremely common names in Judea in the 1st century. Hundreds can be found of Jesus, son of Joseph, in the records of the time. This tomb has no connection with Jesus of Nazareth. It's pure chance, a coincidence sans signification. That's the official argument, l'argument that repeat all the skeptics. And at first glance, it seems reasonable. After all, Yeshua was indeed a common first name. Yosef too. Maria too. If we find a grave with these 3 names, why be surprised? But here's the problem. Clones. He does no calculations. He simply states that it's common. So that's it, a coincidence. He doesn't ask himself, what is the statistical probability that all these names appear together in a specific family configuration in the same grave? He doesn't ask himself the question. Or rather, he refuses to ask oneself that question. 2007, 27 years after the discovery, a documentary is being broadcast sur Discovery Channel. The Lost Tomb of Jesus. The Lost Tomb of Jesus, produced by James Cameron, the director of Titanic. Directed by Simcha Jakobovich, journalist and documentary filmmaker, Israeli-Canadian. The documentary poses to address the question head-on. And if this tomb was really Jesus's, what if we could disprove it mathematically? Cameron and Jacobovici do what Kloner should have done in 1980. They contact statisticians, real ones, independent experts, without a religious agenda, people which will simply calculate the probability. They are addressing to the professor Andre Feuerwerker, University of Toronto, Statistics Department, one of the statisticians the most respected to the world, probability specialist, Bayesian models, complex data analysis, a rigorous man, methodical, who published dozens of articles in magazines to a reading committee. He is given the data, the names found in Talpiot's tomb, the family configuration, and he is asked, what is the probability that this combination of names, is it just a coincidence? Firefighters accept, but he sets his conditions. He wants a solid database, not vague estimates, documented figures, verifiable. He has provided the lexicon of Jewish names in late antiquity, a database compiled by Tal Ilan, researcher at the Hebrew University from Jerusalem, a massive amount of academic work. Who is taking stock? All documented Jewish names in late antiquity. Period covered 300 BC to 200 AD. Sources: Ossuaries, Inscriptions, literary texts, administrative documents. Result: approximately 26 and 25 male names cataloged. 328 female names, with the frequency of each name calculated from the number of occurrences in the sources. Feuerwerger is examining the data. It establishes the frequency individual names. Yeshua, Jesus, 6% of men. Approximately 1 man in 17. Joseph, 14% of men. A man out of 7. Maria or Miriam, Marie, 21% of women. A woman out of 5. The female first name, the most common of the time. All of them, 6% of men. Less frequent, but not rare. Yehuda, Judah, 10% of men, taken individually. These names are indeed common. Kloner was right on this point. Corn firefighters, it doesn't stop there. Because the question is not, what is the probability to find a Jesus or a Joseph? The question is, what is the probability to find this exact family configuration? All these names together, in the same grave? That's a question, combinatorics, conditional probabilities, Bayesian calculations. Feuerwerger is building its model. He starts from hypotheses conservatives, deliberately conservative, to avoid overestimating the probability. Population of Jerusalem in the 1st century, approximately 80,000 inhabitants, average estimate. Based on historical sources. How many families possess tombs with ossuaries? Not all of them. The ossuaries were a practice of the elite and the middle class. The poor didn't have any. The very rich had monumental tombs different. Estimation conservative. Approximately 1,000 family graves with ossuaries in Jerusalem during the period in question, from 20 years ago to 70 AD. Now, the question becomes, among these 1,000 graves, how many would they contain the following configuration? A man named Yeshua, son of a man named Yosef, a woman named Maria, a man named Al, brother of Yeshua, a man named Yehuda, son of Yeshua. Feuerwerger wall light probabilities. It multiplies the frequencies. He adjusts for family relationships. It takes into account the fact that some names are not independent. If a man's name Yeshua bar Yosef, the probability that he has a brother named Yose is slightly higher than the general probability. Because the names were often passed on within families, he performs his calculations. He checks. He's revising. The witness, different scenarios, and it happens to a result. Published in 2007, with the documentary, A Chance Out of 600. Read carefully. A chance out of 600. This means that out of 600 family graves from Jerusalem in the 1st century, only one would contain this name configuration. And there was about 1,000 graves in total. So statistically, there might be 1 or 2 graves with this configuration throughout Jerusalem. And we found one. To Talpiot, the probability that it was a coincidence is not 0, but it is weak. Very weak. Obviously. The controversy explodes. Criticism is pouring in. Rival statisticians, they dispute the methodology. They say that the assumptions are too favorable, that the population from Jerusalem was perhaps larger. The number of graves was perhaps higher. Let the calculations depend of unverifiable parameters. Feuerwerger is listening. He's revising. In 2008, he publishes a revised version of his calculation, with assumptions even more conservative. It increases the estimated population. It increases the number of graves. He reduces the constraints. New result: a chance out of 100 to 200. According to the parameters choose. Even in the scenario the most conservative, the probability of a coincidence remains weak. A chance out of 100. This means that there is a 99% chance that this tomb not a random coincidence. But wait. There is an element that we don't yet have fully integrated in the calculation. One element which changes everything. the ossuary number 6, the one who bears the name Mariamene and Mara. Marie said, "The mistress. This is not a common name. This is not Maria. This is Mariamene, a Greek form particular, a name that we find in very little from ancient sources. Or there is a text, a discovered text in Egypt in 1945, in the library of Nag Hammadi, a collection of manuscripts Christian Gnostics hidden in the 4th century to escape to destruction, ordained by the Orthodox Church. One of these texts is called the Gospel of Philip. And in this text, we find the name Mariamene. Mariamene, Jesus' companion, the one he loved more than all the disciples, the one he was kissing often on the mouth, much to the dismay of Pierre and others. There is also the Acts of Philip, an apocryphal text from the 4th century. Again, we find the name Mariamene, identified as being Marie Magdalene. You begin to have the connection? See, Mariamene in Talpiot's tomb is the same Mariamene that Gnostic texts. So it's Marie Magdalene, Jesus' companion. And if Mary Magdalene was the companion of Jesus, then the ossuary, which bears the inscription, Yehuda, Bar Yeshua, Judah, son of Jesus, suddenly a new meaning. It's no longer an inexplicable anomaly. This is proof that Jesus was married, that he had a son named Judah. Some statisticians tried to recalculate the probability, including Mariamene in the equation. The name is so rare that his presence drastically reduced the probability of a coincidence. Some calculations, non-consensual, reach figures as a chance out of 30,000. But even without going that far, even while remaining conservative, the probability remains significant. Understand this clearly. The academic community is divided. This is not a consensus. Some researchers accept the probability as significant, as a strong clue that this tomb could be that of Jesus. Others reject the methodology. They claim that the calculations depend too much of unverifiable assumptions. Others still refuse even to discuss, considering that the question is closed in principle. May the resurrection is a dogma of faith non-negotiable. There is 3 camps. Premier camp, cautious acceptance. They say the probability is interesting. That's a clue, but that's not definitive proof. We must continue searching. Second camp, methodological skepticism. They say the calculations are fragile. They depend on too much of unknown variables. We cannot conclude anything. Third camp, dogmatic rejection. They say it's impossible. This contradicts the doctrine. So the calculations are necessarily false. The numbers don't matter. You recognize this third camp? Isn't that right? It's the same who forced Galileo to retract, the same who ostracized Darwin, the same who interned Semmelweis. But here, that is undeniable. Beyond of any statistical debate, these ossuaries exist. They are cataloged O. Rockefeller Museum, IAA 8500 at 8509. These names are engraved in the stone for 2,000 years. Yeshua, Bar, Yosef. Maria, all of them. Yehuda Bar, Yeshua. Mariamene, and Mara. This configuration is documented, photographed, measured. Mathematics, they don't lie. Even though we can discuss it parameters. And even in the scenario, the most conservative, the probability that it was a coincidence remains weak. So, why this discovery? Didn't she make the front page of all the newspapers for weeks? For what isn't it taught in universities? Why do most people have never heard about it? Because there is something even more disturbing than the ossuaries themselves. There is the texts that we hid. December 1945, Upper Egypt, near the city of Nag Hammadi, at about 500 kilometers south of Cairo. Peasants are digging at the foot of a cliff. They are looking for sabak, a natural fertilizer rich in nitrates that we find in old deposits. It's a difficult job under the scorching sun. They dig in their shovels in the hardened sand. Suddenly, a shock. The shovel hits something hard, not stone, something hollow. They dig around it. They uncover a jar, a large jar in red terracotta, sealed with wax, approximately 1 meter. Old, visibly very old. One of the peasants hesitates to open it. What if it was a djinn locked in there? An evil spirit? That's what they say, the legends. But curiosity wins. He breaks the seal with his pickaxe. Inside, no djinn. Books. 13 volumes bound in leather. Codexes, as they are called. Papyrus manuscripts, sewn together like modern books. Not rolls. Books. The peasants, they can't read. They don't understand what they found. But they know one thing. Antique objects sell well. They divide the codices between them. Some end up on the black market antiquities from Cairo. Others are burned to fuel the fire. Their mother, not knowing what it was, would have used several to bake the bread. Fortunately, some codices survive. Merchants buy them. Collectors are interested in it. And finally, between 1946 and 1952, most are recovered by the Coptic Museum from Cairo. When the experts examine these manuscripts, they understand immediately what they have in her hands. 13 codices, 52 texts in total, written in Coptic, the language of early Christian Egypt, but translated Greek originals older, dated to the 4th century after Jesus Christ for the copies. But the original texts go back I am in the 3rd century. In the content, Gospels, Christian texts, but not canonical texts. Texts that the church had condemned. Texts that she had ordered to destroy. Texts Gnostics. To understand why these texts were hidden in a jar in the middle of the desert, we need to go back in the 4th century, 325 after Jesus Christ. Emperor Constantine summons the Council of Nicaea, the first great council ecumenical of the Christian Church. Objective: to define orthodoxy, decide which is true and that which is heretical. For 3 centuries, Christianity was plural. Several currents coexisted, several interpretations whose Jesus was, from what he taught, of what it represented. There was Jewish Christians who thought that Jesus was the Messiah, but that it was necessary to continue to be continued the law of Moses. There was Pauline Christians who thought that the law was abolished. There was the Gnostics who thought that Jesus had come bring a secret knowledge, a gnosis, to free the mind of the prison of matter. They all considered themselves Christians. They all worshiped Jesus, but they didn't tell the same story. The Council of Nicaea with fin to this pluralism. Orthodoxy defines itself. Jesus is God incarnate, of the same nature than the Father. He is physically dead and physically resurrected. Any other interpretation becomes heresy. Gnosticism is convicted. For what? Because the Gnostics claimed that Jesus was not really dead on the cross. The resurrection was spiritual, not physical. That the material body, it didn't matter. Only the mind counted. For the Orthodox Church, that was unacceptable. If Jesus is not physically dead and physically resurrected, so there is no redemption, no salvation. All of theology collapses. 367 after Jesus Christ. Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, writing his famous Easter letter. He established there the official list of the 27 books of the New Testament canonical. The 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, Jean. The Acts of the Apostles, the epistles of Paul, Apocalypse. These books, and only those, are recognized as Holy Scripture. All other texts Christians are declared apocrypha, heretics, and Athanase ordered their destruction. The bishops must confiscate them, burn them, erase all traces. Somewhere in Upper Egypt, in a monastery near Nag Hammadi, monks receive this order. They possess a library, Gnostic Gospels, texts whom they venerate. Let them study for generations. They know what is being asked of them. Destroy their spiritual heritage, but they cannot to resign oneself to it. So they do what they often do, those who want to preserve what others want to destroy. They're hiding. They take their manuscripts, the most precious. They place them in a jar made of terracotta. They sealed the jar, and they buried him in the desert, at the foot of a cliff, where no one will not find it, except that 1,600 years later, peasants find them. 1945, the codices are recovered. The Coptic Museum in Cairo possesses them. The researchers want to study them, translate them, publish them. But access is restricted, very limited. Between 1956 and 1977, for 21 years, the translations are progressing slowly. Some texts are published, partially, in academic journals, obscures, but no full publication, no translation accessible to the general public. Official reason, scientific work is meticulous, complex. It takes time. Real reason, the content is explosive. The ecclesiastical authorities exert pressure. They don't want that these texts be widely disseminated, because they tell, that's another story. A story that the church has passed 1,600 years to be deleted. Eventually, in 1977, the full publication is available. Brilliant edition. The manuscripts of Nag Hammadi are finally accessible to the whole world, and what we read there is astounding. The Gospel of Philip, Codex 2, Text 3, a Gnostic text, probably written between 180 and 250 after Jesus Christ. The Greek original is lost. What remains for us is a Coptic translation from the 4th century. And in this text, there is a passage that Orthodox theologians tried to minimize, to reinterpret, to explain, but whose meaning is clear. The partner of the Savior is Mary Magdalene. The Lord loved him more than all the disciples, and he kissed her often on the mouth. The other disciples were offended by this and expressed their disapproval. They told him, "For what do you love him, her, more than all of us?" There are holes in the manuscript, damaged parts. The brackets indicate probable reconstructions, but the general meaning is undeniable. Jesus had a partner. This companion was Mary Magdalene. He loved her more than all the disciples. He kissed her on the mouth. The other disciples were jealous. They were asking this preference. This is not a relationship ordinary master-disciple. It's an intimate relationship, a relationship of a couple. And that's not the only text. The Gospel of Mary, discovered separately, purchased in 1896, published in 1955, Berlin Papyrus 8502, a Gnostic text of the 2nd century. In this Gospel, Marie Magdalene is presented as the chief disciple of Jesus, the one to whom he revealed secret teachings, the one who understands his doctrines better than all the others. And there's this passage where Pierre, jealous, he asks her. Pierre said to Mary, "Sister, we know that the Savior I loved you more than other women. Tell us the words of the Savior that you remember." Pierre recognizes that Jesus loved Mary more than all the other women, but he is jealous of his authority. He can't stand it that a woman has a spiritual status superior to his own. The Gospel of Thomas. Also, in the library of Nag Hammadi, a collection of 114 words attributed to Jesus, and in the end, the Logion 114, disturbing. Simon Peter said to them, "Let Mary leave our midst, because women are not worthy of life." Jesus said, "Here I will guide her in order to make her male, so that she too become a living spirit similar to you males, because every woman who will become male will enter in the kingdom of heaven." Yes, the passage is misogynistic according to our modern criteria. But what matters, this is the conflict that he reveals. Pierre wants to exclude Marie. He can't stand it, his presence among the disciples. And Jesus defends her. He states that she has her place, how dignified she is, that she will enter in the kingdom. You see the pattern? In all these texts, Mary Magdalene occupies a central position. She is Jesus' companion. She is his favorite disciple. She has a spiritual authority who threatens Pierre and the other male disciples. These texts show that early Christianity was plural. Several interpretations coexisted. Some communities saw Mary Magdalene like the apostle to the apostles, the main disciple. Some traditions even claimed a marital relationship between her and Jesus. But the Orthodox Church, the one who triumphed in the 4th century, the one who defined the canon, chose another version. A version where Mary Magdalene is reduced to silence, where she is no longer the partner, but the sinner repentance. In 591, Pope Gregory first delivers a sermon. He conflates 3 different women mentioned in the Gospels: Mary Magdalene, Mary of Bethany, and the sinful woman anonymous from the Gospel of Luke. Gregory declares that these 3 women, they are one and the same. And this unique woman, Mary Magdalene, was a prostitute, a sexual sinner that Jesus saved her. This confusion, this transformation of the apostle as a prostitute will be maintained during 1,378 years. It was only in 1969 that the Vatican officially withdraws this name. But evil, it's done. In the collective imagination Western, Mary Magdalene, the repentant prostitute, remains, not the partner, not the chief apostle. So, let's go back at Talpiot's tomb. There is an ossuary brand, Maria Mene and Mara. Marie said the mistress, an unusual Greek name, a title of authority. And in the text of Nag Hammadi, Maria Mene is found, Jesus' companion. In the Acts of Philip, apocryphal text from the 4th century, Mariamne is found, identified like Mary Magdalene, the same name, the same character. The historical reconstruction becomes possible. Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene. It was normal for a Jewish rabbi from the 1st century. Celibacy was not valued in Judaism of the time. On the contrary, getting married and have children, it was a religious duty. They had a son, Judah. Hence the marked ossuary, Yehuda bar Yeshua, Judah son of Jesus. After the crucifixion, the family buries Jesus in a family tomb in Talpiot. Marie is buried there too. Later, when they die, Judah, he is buried there. All, Jesus' brother also. But the Christian community primitive is divided. Some disciples, especially those Gnostic communities, honor Mary Magdalene. They recognize her as the chief apostle. Others, around Pierre, they are jealous of her. They cannot stand that a woman to have this authority. In the 4th century, orthodoxy triumphs. Gnostic texts are destroyed. Pierre's version, the one where Marie is silenced, becomes the official version. The family tomb in Talpiot is forgotten, covered over time, through the rubble, through forgetting. And then, in 1980, we are rediscovering it. But the truth is too dangerous, too disturbing, so we downplay it. He is buried again, not physically, but intellectually. We put it away in a museum. We publish a discreet report. It is stated that it's a coincidence. These texts of Nag Hammadi are not modern inventions. They date of the 2nd and the 4th century. They show that it existed an alternative tradition, a tradition where Mary Magdalene was the chief apostle, Jesus' companion, a tradition that the church systematically erased for 1,600 years. But deleting texts is one thing. Erasing a grave, that's another one. So, what happened? After the discovery from 1980, who wanted to disappear these ossuaries? And above all, why one of them did he mysteriously disappeared? There is a problem with Talpiot's tomb, a problem elementary mathematics, a problem that nobody doesn't really want to discuss it. In 1980, when Amos Clones and Joseph Gatt enter the tomb newly discovered, they count the ossuaries. They write everything down in their field notebooks. This is the archaeological protocol standard. We're counting, we measure, we take a photograph. On catalog, Clone reports 10 ossuaries. 10. The official numbering of the Israel Antiquities Authority confirms it. IAA 8500 at IAA 8509. 10 issues. 10 ossuaries. But when we examine the archives, when we look the official photographs, when we check the published catalog, we only find 9 ossuaries. 9. Photographed. Measures. Documented. Ossuary number 10 is mentioned in the initial notes as no registration required. And then it disappears. Registers. Photographs. From the official report published 16 years later in 1996. Where did he go? The 10th ossuary, 2007, 27 years after the discovery. Simcha Jakobovich, the journalist who produced The Lost Tomb of Jesus, poses a provocative question, a question which will trigger a storm of controversies. And if the 10th ossuary from Talpiot was Jacques' ossuary? The scenario that he proposes is the following. Mars 1980. The tomb is opened by the explosion. The workers enter. They see the ossuaries. But first, the arrival archaeologists. Someone removes an ossuary. Perhaps a worker who sees an opportunity. Perhaps a local collector who has heard of the discovery. The looting archaeological sites was commonplace at the time. The legislation was less strict. The market antiques flourished. This ossuary enters circulation. He passes from hand to hand on the black market. And in the 1970s, a few years earlier, or maybe just after the discovery of Talpiot, Oded Golan cowardice. He doesn't know where exactly it comes from. The seller didn't tell him. On the market, antiques, we don't ask too many questions. Golan tidies up the ossuary in his collection. He doesn't realize son importance. The inscription is there, but he doesn't make the connection. Not immediately. And then, in 2002, an expert sees the ossuary. He reads the complete registration. Jacques, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. And suddenly, the ossuary. It's making global headlines. That's a hypothesis, but she rests on elements verifiable. The dimensions. Jacques' ossuary measures approximately 50 centimeters to long, 25 large, 30 from above. These are the dimensions standard of an ossuary from the 1st century. And when we look the photographs from Talpiot's tomb, when we examine the available space, there is indeed, from the place for an additional ossuary, an empty space, a space which could correspond to the dimensions from the Ossuary of Jacques, the patina. In 2005, tests are being carried out. We take patina samples on Jacques' ossuary. We compare them with samples on the Talpiot ossuaries. The patina, it is this mineral deposit which forms on the stone over the centuries. Its chemical composition depends on the geological environment, humidity, minerals present in the soil. The results? Compatible. Not identical, because even in the same tomb, the patina may vary slightly depending on the exact location of each ossuary, but the chemical signature is similar, as if the ossuaries came from the same geological region, from the same limestone hill, from Jerusalem, perhaps even from the same grave. My Oded Golan has a counter-argument. He presents a Polaroid photograph, blurry, a photo which would show the ossuary in his apartment, on a shelf. And this photo, according to him, date from before 1980. So, impossible that the ossuary comes from Talpiot. But here's the thing. Authenticity of this photo is disputed. There is no of the date printed on it, no clear context, and the experts in forensic photography who examined her cannot confirm that it really dates from before 1980. Golan claims, yes, that's right, but he cannot prove it. So, we don't know. Perhaps the ossuary Jacques comes from Talpiot. Maybe not. Doubt remains. But what is certain is, it's the resistance institutional faced with this question. The Antiquities Authority of Israel categorically refuses to admit any connection between the tomb of Talpiot and the ossuary of Jacques. She refuses to authorize comparative DNA tests. We could take ancient DNA on the bones found in the Talpiot ossuaries. We could compare this DNA with any traces that may be present in Jacques' ossuary. If the ossuaries come from the same family, DNA would confirm it. But the IAA refuses. Official reason: protection of artifacts. We cannot damage these precious pieces for invasive tests. The real reason? Political pressures and religious are immense. Understand the context. Israel is a Jewish state. Jerusalem is a holy city for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. A tomb of Jesus in Jerusalem would have implications, geopolitical explosives. Christian tourism represents a major economic issue. 4 million of pilgrims visit Jerusalem every year. They come to see the Holy Sepulchre, the traditional place of the crucifixion and of the resurrection. They come to walk on the stations of the cross. They spend billions the shekels. They keep alive entire neighborhoods of the city. If we announce that Jesus is buried in Talpiot, that of the Holy Sepulchre, this is not the right place. That the physical resurrection, it may never have happened. What's going on? Is tourism collapsing? Are the pilgrims stopping coming? The local economy collapses. And then there's the theological implications. The Holy Sepulchre is controlled par 6 confessions, different Christians, Latin Catholics, Greek Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, Copts, Syriac, Ethiopians. Each one possesses part of the church. Everyone celebrates their assessed rights. It's a fragile balance, negotiated for centuries. If Jesus is buried elsewhere, this entire structure collapses. Legitimacy of these churches, which largely rests on control of holy places, is being called into question. So, we understand why the IAA refuses the tests. This is not a scientific question. It's a political issue, a question which touches to the foundations of several religions, to economic interests of a country, to geopolitical stability of a region already explosive. Religious pressures came from everywhere. 2007, the documentary The lost tomb of Jesus is being broadcast. The Vatican reacts immediately. Official statement, a firm denunciation. Speculation without scientific basis. Reminder of the doctrine of bodily resurrection. The Christian faith rests on the empty tomb. If the tomb is not empty, there is no of Christianity. The Orthodox churches, Greek and Russian, who control the Holy Sepulchre, are even more virulent. For them, it's a threat existential. They publish joint statements. They are mobilizing their followers. They are putting pressure on the Israeli authorities. The evangelical community, American, powerful, organized, between also in the battle. For evangelicals, the literal resurrection, physique, is an absolute pillar from the sheets. No metaphor is possible. No spiritual interpretation. Jesus died physically and physically resurrected. Point final. They launch campaigns. They write books to refute the documentary. They organize conferences. They describe Jacobovici at Cameron enemies of the faith. Dagent's destruction of Christianity. And the careers are broken. Simcha Jacobovici, a respected investigative journalist, several awards, documentaries broadcast on major networks. After 2007, its academic credibility is destroyed. He is accused sensationalism, to seek profit, to manipulate the facts. He can no longer obtain funding for serious projects. His name became synonymous of pseudo-archaeology. James Cameron, producer of the documentary, one of the directors, the most powerful to Hollywood, even him is under attack. He is accused to use his celebrity to spread lies, to betray sa foi Catholique of origin. He is defending himself, but he finished by distancing themselves of the project. André Feuerverger, statistician from the University of Toronto, attacked by his peers, accused of having sold its scientific integrity. He must publish clarifications, to distance oneself publicly, affirm that his calculations prove nothing definitive, just a probability. The Professor James Tabor, archaeologist at the University of North Carolina to Charlotte, one of the few academics established to publicly support Talpiot's hypothesis, marginalized, excluded of certain conferences, his requests, subsidies rejected. You recognize the pattern? This is not a scientific refutation. These are attacks to the person. We don't respond to the evidence. We destroy people who dare introduce them. And then, in 2012, a detail emerges. During the long trial, Doded Golan, internal documents of the Antiquities Authority of Israel are revealed. Handwritten notes, field notebooks Damus Cloner, dating from 1980. And in these notes, black on white, is lit 10 ossuaries. But in the official report, published in 1996, Clones does not mention the 9. What happened to the ossuary number 10? There is 3 possible hypotheses. First hypothesis, theft. The ossuary has been removed of the tomb before official cataloging. He entered in circulation on the black market. This is Jacques' ossuary. Oded Golan bought it without knowing its exact origin. Second hypothesis, bureaucratic error. Simple mistake census. Ossuary number 10 was a fragment worthless, incorrectly accounted for initially. It was thrown away or destroyed. A simple explanation, administrative. Third hypothesis, deliberate suppression. Ossuary number 10 bore an inscription too compromising. Someone decided that it was too dangerous to keep it. So, we made it disappear. Intentionally. Which of these 3 hypotheses is that true? Impossible to say with certainty. What is certain is, this is the current state things. The Talpiot ossuaries are stored in a warehouse of the Antiquities Authority. Oromema district from Jerusalem. Access strictly restricted. No public exhibition permanent. No independent researcher cannot examine them freely. The Talpiot site? Concreted. A residential building was built on at the end from the 1980s. Searching was impossible. Again, impossible to verify anything. The site is sealed. Forever. I'm not telling you that the ossuary of Jacques comes necessarily of Talpiot. I'm telling you that this possibility exists, that it is well documented. May she rest based on verifiable elements, and that she was systematically stifled, without scientific refutation, rigorous. Because deep down, the real question is not archaeological. It is theological. It is political. It is economical. Can we afford to know the truth when this true threat of empires, institutions, identities, millennia? But beyond ossuaries, beyond statistics, beyond hidden manuscripts and sealed tombs, there is a question deeper, a question plus simple, a question which touches at the very heart of history that we were told. If Jesus had really a biological father, who was he? And that's it. That we arrive in the name that they wanted to erase. The engraved name on the stone for 2,000 years. Yeshua bar Yosef. Jesus, son of Joseph. Yeshua bar Yosef. Jesus, son of Joseph. This is the inscription, the simplest from Talpiot's tomb. 5 words in Aramaic, a patrilineal line of descent standard, X son of Y, like thousands other inscriptions out of thousands other ossuaries. But this inscription asks a question that nobody doesn't really want to pose. If Jesus had not a biological father, yes, Marie was truly a virgin. If the child was designed through the Holy Spirit, so why engrave Jesus, son of Joseph? To answer, we need to go back to Joseph, the forgotten father, the erased figure, the man which we are not talking about almost never, except to say that he was not truly the father. What do we know really to Joseph? It appears in the stories of childhood. Matthew chapters 1 and 2. Luke chapters 1 and 2. That's almost all. 2 chapters in each gospel. Then it disappears. Matthew tells us that Joseph is a just man. When he discovers that Marie, his fiancée, is pregnant, he decides to repudiate her discreetly. He doesn't want to publicly humiliate him. But an angel appears to him in a dream and said to him, "Don't be afraid to take Marie for wife." The child, it comes from the Holy Spirit. Joseph obeyed. He marries Marie. When Jesus was born, Herod orders the massacre children from Bethlehem. Joseph fled to Egypt with Marie and the child. They stay there until Herod's death. Then they come back and settle in Nazareth. Luke tells differently. Joseph and Mary live in Nazareth. They must surrender in Bethlehem for a census. Jesus was born there. 40 days later, they take the child at the temple in Jerusalem to present it to God according to Jewish law. Then they return in Nazareth. But there's one detail at Luke's. One detail crucial. Luke chapter 2, verse 48. Jesus is 12 years old. Says parents they take him to Jerusalem for Passover. On the way back, they realize that Jesus is not with them. They return, look for it. They find him at the temple, discussing with the doctors of the law. Marie said to him, "My child, why did you do this to us? Your father and me, we were looking for you with anguish." Your father. Mary calls Joseph, your father. Naturally, without hesitation, without specifying your adoptive father, without specifying your legal father, just your father. After this episode, Joseph disappears completely gospel narratives. No mention during the public prosecutor's office of Jesus. No mention during the crucifixion. When Jesus dies on the cross, the Gospels mention that his mother, Marie, is present, but not Joseph. The historical hypothesis. The most likely one? Joseph was dead before Jesus don't start his ministry at 30 years old. Normal. Life expectancy at the time was 40 at 50 years old. Joseph probably had 25 at 35 at the wedding. 30 years later, he was dead. But here's the thing, which is strange. Gradually, in the Christian tradition, Joseph is erased, minimized, transformed. Mark, the oldest gospel, written around the year 70, called Jesus, son of Mary. Mark chapter 6, verse 3. Isn't that right? The carpenter. Marie's son? That's unusual. In Jewish culture from the first century, a man is identified by his father, not by his mother. It is said, Jesus, son of Joseph, not Jesus, son of Mary. To say son of Mary can indicate two things. Either the father is already dead, either there is a stigma of illegitimate birth, a doubt on paternity. Jean, the latest gospel, written around 95-100, minimizes even more Joseph. Jean, chapter 1, verse 45. Philippe said, "We found the one Moses wrote in the law, and whose prophets have spoken. Jesus of Nazareth, son of Joseph." But John don't tell no births, no childhood. His gospel begins directly with the public prosecutor's office. Joseph is mentioned once, then he disappears, like an awkward figure of which we do not know what to do. And in later tradition, c. 3rd, 4th century, when the doctrine of the virgin birth hardens, Joseph becomes downright embarrassing. Because here's the thing, the theological problem. If Mary is a virgin, if she remains a virgin after the birth of Jesus, then Joseph is here, inside the house, married to Marie, and he never touches her? For years? It's hard to believe. It's even absurd from a human perspective. So, the theological solution, it's about getting old Joseph, to desexualize it, to transform it as a powerless patriarch. The proto-gospel of James, apocryphal text written around 150. Joseph is here like an old widowed man. He already had children from a first marriage. The priests are looking someone to protect Marie, this young virgin dedicated to the temple. They choose Joseph, not like a husband in a marital sense, but as a goalkeeper, an old man incapable of sexual desire, who will simply protect the virginity of Mary. The story of Joseph the carpenter. Coptic text from the 4th century goes even further. Joseph, in 90 years, when he marries Marie, 90 years old. He dies at 111 years old, before Jesus don't start his ministry. The objective is clear. Return Joseph so old that it is biologically impossible that he be the father of Jesus. Desexualize him completely, transforming it in figure inoffensive. But the historical reality was probably very different. Jesus was born around the year 4 before our era. Joseph probably had 25 at 35 years old, the normal age of the wedding for a Jewish man of the time. He is described like teton in Greek, traditionally translated by carpenter, but tekton means rather artisan, construction worker, someone who works the wood, but also the stone, a bricklayer, a stonemason, a manufacturer, Nazareth. It was a tiny village 200 to 400 inhabitants. No work for a craftsman. But 6 kilometers away, Sepphoris was there, the capital of Galilee. Herod Antipas rebuilding it entirely during the years from the childhood of Jesus. Massive construction projects, thousands of workers. Joseph was probably working on these construction sites. He left in the morning. He walked 6 kilometers, worked all day. He came home in the evening. Lower middle class, not poor, but not rich either. Enough to feed a family. And what family? The Gospels mention that Jesus had brothers and sisters. Mark chapter 6, verse 3. Isn't that right? Jacques' brother, from Jose of Jude. And what about Simon? And her sisters, aren't they here among us? 4 brothers named, at least 2 sisters, minimum 6 children in addition to Jesus. A large family, normal for the time. The Catholic Church and Orthodox affirms that these brothers are in reality half-brothers, son of Joseph from a first marriage, or cousins, because the Aramaic word for brother can also mean cousin. Protestants say that they are biological brothers, children of Joseph and of Mary after the birth of Jesus. But the historical argument is simple. The Talpiot Ossuary contains all of them, the affectionate diminutive of Joseph. And that's exactly the name from one of Jesus' brothers mentioned in Mark 6:3, Yosses, all in Aramaic. So let's go back at registration. Yeshua bar Yosef, Jesus, son of Joseph, patrilineal descent asserted, engraved in the stone. By whom? Probably through his family, by those who buried him, those who knew who he really was. The Orthodox response is as follows. Joseph was the legal father of Jesus. So even if Jesus had no biological father, it was normal to designate him as son of Joseph. According to legal parentage, the historical answer is simpler. Joseph was the biological father. Lineage is natural, not adoptive. So the question becomes taboo. If Joseph was really the biological father of Jesus, what difference does that make? For the historian? Nothing. Jesus remains a major historical figure, a charismatic teacher, a Jewish rabbi who preached love, forgiveness, to justice, a man who founded a movement, who transformed the world. His biological fatherhood, nothing changes to its historical impact. For the liberal theologian, nothing either. Spiritual truth transcends biology. Jesus can embody the divine without having been miraculously born. His message, his teaching, it is known. All of this has a spiritual, dimension-independent circumstances from his birth. But what about the Orthodox believer? All. Absolutely everything. Because the virgin birth is not a folkloric detail. This is a central doctrine, affirmed in the Nicene Creed, heart of the dogma of the Incarnation. If Jesus has a human biological father, so it is not the Son of God incarnate. He is a man, just one man. And all of Christian theology collapses. I'm not asking you to abandon your faith. I'm not here to destroy which gives meaning to your life, or to that millions of people. I'm simply showing you what they reveal historical sources. Registrations engraved in stone, the ossuaries, discoveries in a tomb, the manuscripts hidden for centuries. What you do with it, it's your choice, your freedom, your responsibility. But there remains a question. If this tomb is really that of Jesus and his family, if these ossuaries really contain their bones, so why the church did she build an entire theology on the empty tomb? Why physical resurrection has she become the central pillar Christianity, because the tomb is empty, has never been empty. This is the story that we built around. To understand why Talpiot's tomb is so dangerous, first, we need to understand on what Christianity is really based, not on the teachings of Jesus, not on his parables, not on its message of love and forgiveness. None. Christianity is based on an event, just one, unique, miraculous, an event that makes all the difference between a religion and a simple moral philosophy, the physical resurrection of Jesus. Without resurrection, no Christianity. Paul himself says so in his first epistle to the Corinthians, chapter 15, verse 14. If Christ has not been raised, our preaching is empty, and empty your faith as well. So, what really happened after the crucifixion? To answer, we need to examine the oldest sources, not the later legends, not the embellished stories, the first testimonies, those who are closest to the events, the oldest texts we possess on the resurrection. This is precisely Paul's first epistle to the Corinthians, written around the year 54 AD, only 20 years after the crucifixion. Paul writes, Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures. He was buried. He was resurrected on the third day according to the Scriptures. He appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at once. Then he appeared to Jacques. Then to all the apostles. Finally, he also appeared to me. This is the foundational text, the first written account of the resurrection. But notice something essential. Paul does not mention any empty tombs, not a word. About women discovering a tumbled stone, not a word. About an angel announcing the resurrection. He speaks of apparitions. Jesus appeared to Peter, then to the 12, then to 500 people, then to Jacques, then to Paul himself. Appearances, visions. Paul himself claims to have seen Jesus on the road to Damascus. But it was not a physical encounter. It was a vision, a blinding light, a voice, not a walking body. Who is speaking? Who eats? And Paul places all these apparitions on the same level. Pierre's, the one of the 12, the one with the 500, and hers, as if they were of the same nature, all visionary experiences, all of them spiritual encounters. Now, let's move on to the Gospels. Mark, the oldest one, written around the year 70, 40 years after the crucifixion. His Gospel ends in chapter 16, verse 8. The women come to the tomb. The stone is rolled away. A young man dressed in white told them, "He has risen again. He's not here." And the women flee, terrified. And that's all. Mark's original ending ends there. Verse 8. They didn't tell anyone because they were afraid. No appearance of Jesus. No meeting with the disciples. Just an empty tomb and terrified women who say nothing. Verses 9 to 20. Those who recount the appearances of Jesus are a later addition. They are absent from the oldest manuscripts. The style is different. The experts agree. Mark didn't write them. A later scribe added an ending, because the original ending seemed too disturbing, too abrupt. So Mark, the oldest of the Gospels, does not recount any appearance of the resurrected one. He stops to the empty tomb. Then, the story is evolving. Matthew, around 80-85, he adds details. Guards at the tomb, an earthquake, an angel rolling the stone, appearances in Galilee. The narrative is gaining momentum. He becomes more defensive, more apologetic. Luke, around 85-90, Even more details. Jesus walks, speak, share a meal. He eats fish to prove that he is not a spirit. The body becomes more material. Then Jean, around 95-100. Thomas has doubts. Jesus is coming back. Thomas touches the wounds, the ultimate proof. The further we get from the events, the more tangible the body becomes, the more the story solidifies. It's the opposite of a raw testimony. That's the sign of a progressive theological construction. So, what really happened? 4 hypotheses exist: traditional faith, a physical resurrection, visionary experiences, appearances linked to trauma and grief, the body was moved for unknown reasons, or the Talpiot family tomb, a discreet burial, a spiritual resurrection that has become, over time, physique. It's impossible to make a definitive decision, but one thing is certain: someone has transformed this belief in central dogma. This man, it's Paul. Paul never knew Jesus alive. Never. He meets him, a vision, and it's him who performs resurrection, the absolute pillar. Without resurrection, no salvation. Without Paul, Christianity might have disappeared. Then came the councils: Nicaea, Constantinople, Chalcedony. Resurrection becomes non-negotiable. And finally, the empty tomb, discovered 3 centuries later, authenticated, sacred, and untouchable. So when an actual grave appears, with names engraved in stone, it becomes dangerous, because Christianity was built on an empty tomb. But this tomb, it may never have been empty. Perhaps what is empty? This is not the grave, but the story that we built around it. The historical truth and spiritual truth, they are not enemies. They are simply different. We're back to the starting point. Galileo, forced to retract, dies under house arrest. Darwin, caricatured as a monkey. He spent his last years consumed by anxiety. Semmelweis, interned in an asylum, beaten to death for simply saying that one should wash their hands. Patricia Crone, harassed until her death in 2015 for having applied it to the history of Islam the same rigor that we apply to any other story. The mechanism is always the same. A disturbing truth emerges. The institution feels threatened. She attacks the messenger. It eliminates the discovery. Silence falls. Decades pass, sometimes centuries. And then, discreetly, when no one feels threatened anymore, rehabilitation is coming. But today, we have a choice that our ancestors did not have. We don't have to wait 50 years, 100 years, 200 years to recognize what the sources reveal. We have access to the information. We can check. We can examine the evidence for ourselves. We can decide freely what we do with it. So, what do we know for certain? Talpiot's tomb exists. This is not a legend. This is not an invention. The ossuaries are cataloged. IAA 8500 to 8509. The names are engraved in stone for 2,000 years. Yeshua bar Yosef, Maria, all of them, Maria Mene and Mara, Yehuda bar Yeshua. You can check the references. You can consult the archives. Statistical probability that this name configuration, it's a coincidence, is weak. Between 1 chance in 100 and a 1 in 600 chance. According to the most conservative calculations, this is not an absolute certainty, but it is a significant probability. The Nag Hammadi manuscripts exist, discovered in 1945, hidden by monks in the 4th century to escape destruction ordained by the church. These texts show that an alternative tradition existed, a tradition where Mary Magdalene was the companion of Jesus. the chief apostle, the one he loved more than all the others, a tradition that the Orthodox Church systematically erased. Jacques' ossuary exists, authentic or not, debated, disputed, but it reveals one essential thing. Someone, at some point, wanted to honor James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. This family link was important enough to be engraved in stone. The progressive construction of the dogma of the resurrection is documented. Paul, who has never known Jesus, transforms a messianic Jewish movement, a universal religion. The councils of the 4th and 5th centuries establish orthodoxy. Non-compliant texts are destroyed. Sacred geography is created. The empty tomb becomes a theological necessity. All of this is verifiable, documented, published in academic journals. These are not conspiracy theories. These are historical facts. But here's what's just as important. It doesn't change. Jesus remains a major historical figure. One of the men, the most influential who have ever lived. His teaching about love, forgiveness, to justice, compassion transformed the world. That his father be Joseph or the Holy Spirit, nothing changes to the power of its message. Christianity inspired 2,000 years the art of literature, of music, of compassion, of civilization. Cathedrals, hospitals, universities, millions of lives found meaning, hope, of consolation in this faith. The faith of 2 billion people today deserves respect. You cannot, you must not, despise which gives meaning to so many lives. So, what difference does that make? This changes our understanding of the birth of religions, not by instant revelation fell from the sky, but through a human process, construction progressive, by decisions taken in specific historical contexts, for political reasons, social, theological. This helps us to recognize the mechanisms of power, how institutions use the sacred to legitimize themselves, how they define orthodoxy and condemn heresy, how they control the narrative by removing the alternatives. This teaches us to distinguish historical truth and spiritual truth. Both they are not enemies. Both can coexist. We can recognize that Jesus had a biological father named Joseph and believe that he embodied a divine truth, that his teaching was inspired, that his life had a spiritual scope which transcends biological circumstances from his birth. Both they are not mutually exclusive. It is the institution which made them incompatible. Mature faith, she can accommodate complexity. You, who have lived long enough to see the collapse of certainties, you know that the truth does not destroy. She sets us free. She releases of the obligation to believe the impossible. She releases of fear of questioning. She releases guilt doubt. And hear what you can transmit to future generations. 3 essential lessons. First lesson, question that is not betrayal. Questioning the origins of a tradition. It's not about destroying it. Blind faith is fragile. Informed faith is solid. Second lesson, history belongs to everyone. The old documents, the graves, the registrations, the manuscripts are the heritage of humanity. Person cannot monopolize them. Third lesson, historical truth does not equal spiritual truth. Both can coexist. Let's go back to the one who opened this path, Patricia Crone, death in 2015, at 70 years old, of cancer. His work survives because the truth has a strange property. We can bury it, censor it, attack those who reveal it. But we can't kill her. It always resurfaces, stone by stone, document after document, generation after generation. Today, you possess this knowledge, and you have a choice. Reject it or pass it on, with nuance, with respect, with courage. 2,000 years ago, a man has died in Jerusalem. His name was Yeshua bar Yosef, Jesus, son of Joseph, a Jewish rabbi, a charismatic teacher, a man who preached love, forgiveness, to justice. His family buried him in a tomb carved into the rock in Talpiot. They engraved his name on a limestone ossuary, Yeshua bar Yosef. And then, the story continued. Some disciples had visions, apostles preached, communities were born, dogmas have been formulated, empires converted. And all this time, the name engraved in stone was waiting, not to destroy, but just to reiterate that behind every myth, there are humans. That behind every dogma, there is history there. And that this life, however extraordinary it may be, was human, deeply, beautifully human.